How have these student development theories of the past fallen short in their ability to address the identity, realities, and experiences of marginalized students? What was missing there? What is missing there?
The theories help us understand how to help students feel like they belong in a space that oftentimes they don't feel like they belong. And so I know when I was doing student support services, I was a predominantly white institution. And sometimes the spaces in which I was doing that work were the places where our students felt most comfortable. So how do I arm them using these theories with a belonging that takes them throughout their time at that institution?
Welcome to Student Affairs Now, the online learning community for student affairs educators. I'm your host, Rochelle Pope. Student Affairs Now is the premier podcast and learning community for thousands of us who work in, alongside, or adjacent to the field of higher education and student affairs. We release new episodes every week on Wednesdays, and you can find us at studentaffairsnow.com. You can find us on YouTube or anywhere that you listen to podcasts. This episode today is brought to you by Stylus Publishing. Visit styluspub.com and use the promo code SANOW for 30% off and free shipping. This episode is also sponsored by Vector Solutions, formerly EverFi, the trusted partner for 2,000 colleges and universities. EverFi is the standard of care for student safety and inclusion. Now, as I mentioned, I'm Rochelle Pope. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm broadcasting from Williamsville, New York, near the campus of the University at Buffalo, where I serve as the Senior Associate Dean of Faculty and Student Affairs and the University Diversity Officer for the Graduate School of Education. I'm also a professor in the Higher Education and Student Affairs programs. The University at Buffalo is situated on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Haudenosaunee people. I'm joined today by two of the editors of the book, Square Pegs and Round Holes, Alternative Approaches to Diverse College Student Development Theory. I'm with Dr. Fred Bonner and Dr. Stella Smith. Now, as a self-professed and longtime student development geek, I am so excited to have this conversation and to revisit college student development frameworks with a focus on marginalized communities. So thank you for joining me today for this episode of Student Affairs Now, and welcome to the podcast. I was hoping that you could begin by telling us a bit about you, your current role on campus, and a bit about your pathways in education. Fred, why don't you start us off?
Well, thank you so much, my dear friend. I'm always excited to see you and always excited to participate in any conversation related to higher ed and student affairs. And you have been doing great work, excellent work for a long time. And I so appreciate your friendship, your mentoring, your peer mentoring, and the role that you're playing in the field of student affairs and in higher ed.
That is so thank you.
Yes. Wouldn't have missed it. I want to share just a little bit about me. My name is Fred Bonner. I am professor, endowed chair, and the Wilhelmina Delco endowed chair here at Prairie View A&M University. And if you don't know anything about Prairie View, we are the HBCU in the Texas A&M University system. So about 45 minutes down the road from the College Station campus. But I am the director, as you can see on my shirt, of the Mach 3 Center. That stands for Minority, Achievement, Creativity, and High Ability. So the Mach 3 Center is a galvanizing space for us to be able to foreground research that focuses on minoritized populations, to focus on issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And it's a place and a space that the A&M system has been so generous to provide me with the opportunity and the space and room just to dream about what is best for minoritized populations in higher education, across the higher education spectrum. So I've been in this role since 2015. Prior to that, I was the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Endowed Chair at Rutgers University. So a little bit of a shift from the Northeast coast to the South, but a good shift. Excited about being here and excited about the work that we're doing. So, and you'll get an opportunity to hear from the Associate Director of the Mach 3 Center, Dr. Stella Smith. But the two of us are basically, as I said before, trying to foreground what is best practices, and the alchemy for success for minoritized populations across the higher education diaspora.
Great, thank you. And all of those kind words you said about me, I certainly bounce right back to you. I feel so much of the same. Stella, please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. My name is Stella Smith, and I am Associate Director of the Mach 3 Center, as Dr. Bonner said, and I'm also an Assistant Professor in the Educational Leadership and Counseling Department in the Whitlow R. Green College of Education at Prairie View A&M University. And a little bit, my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And my journey in higher education has mostly been at the University of Texas. I was there for a very long time, and I came to Prairie View in order to do the work at Mach 3 and to be able to be part of Dr. Bonner's dream and vision of creating this space on campus to understand and develop asset-based approaches to support underrepresented populations in education. And so I've had the honor to be here since 2017 and have enjoyed all of the wonderful things that we've been able to do so far, and look forward to the things we're going to do in the future.
Oh, that's great. And thank you for introducing yourselves to our audience. I believe that your work far exceeds, the Mach Center and Texas. And so we've all been beneficiaries of your work. And it's as no surprise then that you folks in that center and are focusing on student development theories. I think it's really important as we want to see our students thrive. So I wanted to ask you just a basic and a general question. What are your thoughts on the importance of student development theories and our work with helping students succeed and thrive on college campuses? What have you thought about student development theory, and what are the directions that you've been seeing? And Fred, why don't you start us off there?
Excellent. That is a very important question, a very key question, particularly for those of us who study higher education and student affairs. So going back to some of my early training in higher ed and student affairs, I was always intrigued by the narrative, by the story about how students learned, how they grew, how they developed. But the story and the narrative was always told from a perspective that in some ways I thought left me out. Mm-hmm. It was a perspective where my voice, the people who I knew, the African-American males from my community, or the Hispanic males from my community, or the Hispanic females, or the Native American students. So I just always felt like, as we would always talk about the alphabet soup of names, the Aston, Ascarella, Pascarella, Teranzini, Tinto, Schlossberg, on and on and on, and I was Pat King. The work that she was doing, the list is long. But again, the work that these vanguard scholars was doing was very, very important. It's quintessential, it's key. You could never diminish or wash away a Kohlberg or these people who really gave us the seminal works, the seeds that have grown into student development theory. However, what I wanted was some seeds that were sprinkled in my garden. I come from a place where, there are rich seeds, there are people who are planting, there are people who are sowing, but it didn't seem like I didn't see the manifestation of those fruits. So what did it look like for an African-American male coming from, like me, I come from a small rural town in East Texas. So my high school graduating class back in, getting old, 1987, was the largest class that my town had for a while. It was 100 students. So here it is, I'm coming from small town East Texas, but I went to a public high school there. My mom was a teacher there. My father was my high school assistant principal. So I came from this background of these educators coming from these very rural settings, but some educated, smart Black folks from the country. But that story didn't get mapped into the theories that I was reading. So I wanted to know, what did it look like for me to go off to the University of North Texas and major in chemistry? What did it look like for my my friend who decided to go to Grambling State University and major in, so on and on and on and on and on. So I think the seeds of what we were trying to do with this book, they come from this long-standing tradition and history of folks who look like me, who want to know more about, what does it mean for me to learn, grow, and develop in the higher education context?
Mm-hmm. Stella, I mean, it's really interesting what Fred was saying, that I didn't feel that I was included. My voice wasn't heard, or my flower wasn't able to grow, or plant wasn't able to grow. And I'm wondering, Stella, when maybe you can concretize that for us a bit. How have these student development theories of the past fallen short in their ability to address the identity, realities, and experiences of marginalized students? What was missing there? What is missing there?
Thank you so much for that question. That is critically important. So as I was listening to Dr. Bonner talking, I was thinking back to my student support services time. So I spent some time doing direct student support as a student affairs professional. And when I think about this book, although I come at it from a faculty lens, from an editor lens, I also come at it from a practitioner lens as well. And so I think about how the book helps practitioners discover connection and empathy, but not sympathy. So when you think about these traditional theories that are put into place, when you take one of those theories and you try to put it on an underrepresented population, sometimes the student affairs professional will come up with a sympathetic kind of connection with the student, not an empathetic. We're trying to show that those students are bringing assets, and that is what some of these theories have lacked. They haven't shown our students as bringing assets, because the things that they bring that are so remarkable are not included in those traditional theories, or not thought about in those traditional theories. They're also bringing connection, like helping student affairs professionals understand how they need to connect with students. We would call it intrusive advising, to try to make sure that you are there when a student needs you, and sometimes there when the student doesn't think they need you, and available so the student knows that they can come to you if for some reason you haven't realized that they're in crisis. But I think over all of that, the theories help us understand how to help students feel like they belong in a space that oftentimes they don't feel like they belong. And so I know when I was doing student support services, I was a predominantly white institution, and sometimes the spaces in which I was doing that work were the places where our students felt most comfortable. So how do I arm them using these theories with a belonging that takes them throughout their time at that institution? And I think the theories that we talk about in this book allow student affairs professionals to begin that work, to begin to figure out how to support our students. Each of them is unique, but gives them a closer pathway and a closer guideline to do that than what is traditionally out there in terms of the theories.
Yeah, I really love that asset approach that you talked about, and helping students feel like they belong. And I remember way back, and I got you beat, Fred, way back when I was a student, and I remember at that time they were talking about these theories, and then the people who didn't fit the developmental progress or schematic that was laid out were seen as developmentally delayed. And I remember some of those early things and it took some folks to push and say, wait a minute, the model is just different. I remember with gender, for example, one of the early authors said, it's not that we are developmentally delayed because of our connections with relationship, this develops before that. And that was eye-opening. And so that's how we started saying, well, maybe it's just a little different. Maybe it's a different sequence. And some of the stuff that you folks are talking about, and other both theorists and scholars who write about this stuff are saying, it's not always just that it's in a different order. Sometimes it's just different. And that we've got to recognize that there is that difference, and that difference is valued. Now, let me ask this question of Fred. It's a very similar question to the one for Stella, but I just want to take a different tack. If we develop student development theories that actually responded to the needs and the identities and the realities and experiences of our marginalized students, how would they look different? how would they be different? Or what would the students experience that was different?
Well, that's an excellent question. And I love what you said last. How is the student's experience different? So where we have to start, I think, is that fact that students are having these experiences no matter what their identity is. So they're having the experiences. So now that we recognize, here's the experience. So maybe that's your foundation.
Yeah.
But now the nuances come when we start to look at what that experience means when I layer my identity on top of that. So an experience is an experience is an experience. I mean, there are certain things that we could say there's a baseline that all college students go through A, B, C, and D. However, they're going through A, B, C, and D differently based on what they're bringing to the environment. You know, even if we take away race and take away gender, take away those identifiers. As we delve into some of the K-12 literature, you know, we talk a lot about higher ed too, social and cultural capital. So if we look at what students are bringing to the higher ed context, you know, did they have books in the home? Did they have parents who read to them? Did they have access to resources? Did they have computers? Did they have X, Y, and Z, on and on and on and on. So when we start to look at each student that's going off to college, so here is the first year experience. Well, everyone's going to have this first year experience. However, now we're starting to layer on the identity vectors, the race, the gender, the social cultural capital, you know, the rural versus urban. So there are so many different ways and approaches and so many different identifiers that signal that those frameworks, they can't be operationalized the same way because students don't experience them the same way because they're coming with such different backgrounds, experiences, different traditions, different mores from their homes. You know, I guess the best way I can say it, Dr. Pope. So one of my favorite books and one of my dear colleagues from my days at Texas A&M, he's still there. I think he's retiring this year, Dr. Joe Fagan. So all of his great work in sociology, and I usually keep his book by me pretty close. So one of his books, he has a million, but one of my favorite books is The White Racial Frame. And that book is so intuitive and so emblematic of how I think we should look at student development theory, because herein lies the rub. Just because you take away the frame doesn't mean that you still don't have a picture.
Absolutely.
And I think that is what we sometimes miss. The students are coming to you. They are the picture. And we are framing them in a particular way. And these theories serve as frames. And I would say my Blackness, my boldness, my Black maleness, 9 times out of 10 is bigger than that little frame that you're putting me in.
Right.
Your frame is seeing me as this. I'm seeing myself as this. And how often do we do that to students of color? We put them in a frame that's 5 by 7 and they're 8 by 10.
That's lovely. And that really is, we forget that the frames that we developed were to help us gather some information, to recognize things that were both similar and different. And then all of a sudden we start thinking everybody has to fit the frame, as opposed to we fit the frame to the person.
Absolutely.
By all 5 by 7 frames, we have to recognize there's different sizes. We have to recognize the horizontal and the vertical, etc. Yeah, that's it. That's it. So then you folks wrote this book, or edited this book, wrote parts of this book to offer some alternative approaches to remind people that these frames were just that, frames. They weren't the whole picture. And you wanted to make sure that the theories that you offered, the theories that you highlighted, were particular for these marginalized students. But before we get into the frames that you start offering, I want you to tell us a little bit about the origin story of this book. That's always fascinating for our listeners. How did it begin? How did you come up with the idea for this this book? And talk to me about how you decided who were going to be the co-editors. And then where did you find these amazing chapter authors? How did you all get together to tell this story and to offer this important resource to us?
You know, I kind of chuckle. That's an excellent question. And I chuckle because I immediately think about Estelle Getty's character in The Golden Girls, Sicily, 1922. Let me take you back. When I tell you, if Dr. Bonda was on here, she would definitely say this, and she says it several times. This was a labor of love.
Mm-hmm.
This book, Dr. Pope, it actually started way back when I was, well, the idea, it was a nascent idea, and it started way back when I was teaching college student development theory, and I taught that course for a lot of years and a lot of different spaces.
Mm-hmm.
I first started teaching the course at A&M, College Station. No. I first started teaching that course when I was at Bowling Green State University. So that was my first tenure track position. And I also taught it at UT San Antonio when I was there in the Master's in Higher Ed Student Affairs program. Transitioned to Texas A&M, and I really doubled down on teaching it there in the SAHI program at A&M. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of like my standing course for master's and doctoral level students. And then flash forward to Rutgers University. So in the CSA program, I taught the course there. And now transitioning to Prairie View, still teaching the course. And across all of those contexts, still had this nascent idea that was budding, evolving, and saying, you know, in these very predominantly white spaces, students were saying, Dr. Bonner, that theory does not fit. It doesn't sound like me. What does it mean? That's, you know, I have to force myself to fit into these boxes. Mm-hmm. So it was just always this level of discomfort that the students, particularly my students of color, my students who identified differently, alternatively, whether it was sexual orientation, whether it was their racial, ethnic identity. So there were so many nuances. So many times when I taught the course, we spent just as much time talking about how it was different than the actual theory itself. Mm-hmm. So, and I would share with them just to whet their appetite, because the one thing that I always say in class, my two primary key terms to get the class started is typically, I want you to problematize and deconstruct. Mm-hmm. So there are so many issues out there. Everybody has issues. People Magazine has issues. We study problems. So how can you take that issue and make that issue a problem that we can attack? Mm-hmm. And I want you to deconstruct. So you never take these theories, you never, you know, don't put that in your mouth until you know where it came from. You have to really, really know, how were these theories normed? Do they fit you? Were they normed on populations that sound like you know, have the same traditions? So, maybe not, most of the time not, but I need you to know, I need you to deconstruct how that works. You know, how does it work for you? So what does this theory mean? You know, what does Chickering and Riser mean for this brother coming from Third Ward, Houston, in this context? So I guess I say now, being in a historically Black college and university context, it became even more profound to have access to some theories that reflected the student population that I'm teaching. And again, I always say, I am not throwing away a single traditional extant theory, because those theories are the foundation. So I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, absolutely not. So I'm just saying that this book is, as the title says, alternative theories of college student development. So we want, you know, we've been traveling down this highway of college student development theory since, you know, the 60s, even before. And people of color, we're traveling, we're good with traveling, but sometimes we need off-ramps. There's some things, there's some issues, there's some topics, there are some, you know, you don't always want what's just on the main highway. Sometimes you need to get to that restaurant kind of often. We need to do that very same thing by way of our theories, and that's what this book offers. It gives us some off-ramps to really pursue some venues, some avenues that are really reflective of who we are and what we bring to the higher ed space.
Yeah, so I understand then that this was something that had been germinating with you for years and years and years as you were feeling some discomfort and with the theories, and they're not telling the whole story. They might tell certain people's stories very well, but they're not telling the whole story. But then how did it get from that germination, that idea that you had, to turn into now this book? Stella, what would you add to that? How did it move from this idea and this problem that was tickling at Dr. Bonner for so long? How did it get to you?
Thank you for that question. And so this particular book is really close to me because it is one of the first things that I worked on as part of Mach 3. So it had this long history of being an idea to me helping Dr. Bonner put this proposal together and actually start the process of creating this amazing text. And so, submitting the proposal, going out and identifying chapter authors that really brought these alternative perspectives to that could be written well, that were emblematic, of all of these different alternative ways in which we could approach student development. And so, again, as Dr. Bannon says, it was a labor of love. Even after that, it took some time for the book to finally come to fruition. But what a wonderful product that we had, because we took the time to really think about which ones of the theories are the ones that are important. For this volume, we always hear that we need to make another volume because there's all these other theories that need to be brought out to the forefront and to be a companion to this particular volume. I think what the book also demonstrates is that we've got so many practitioners out there ready and researchers out there ready to share these alternative theories. They're there. We just need to pull them to the forefront and have them in a place where people can use them and can access them in order to support their work. So it's really wonderful. I'm very proud of the fact that we have both practitioners and faculty that have written these chapters. So that these theories are theories that they're actually putting into place. These are theories that are helping students get through their time at whatever type of institution that they're at. And I think what is also so wonderful about this book is that practitioners are seeing themselves in the chapters as well. So as we think about, we do need to help students, and that's definitely what we're here for. Practitioners and faculty are also being validated, and staff are being validated by seeing that there are these theories that might have helped them then, do help them now as they're going through an academic space. So I just, once we got on it, we were on it, and it came and it happened, and we're really excited about that.
Well, that is one of the things that I wanted to bring up about the book before we jump into the frameworks and all, was that this is a book that there are people who are going to pick this up from anywhere in the country, and they're going to recognize some of those chapter author names. They are going to be, oh yeah, these are some of the theories that I've been studying in other classes. This is what I know about student development in this direction. Clearly, some of those folks on this cutting edge of this work. And then at the same time, there are names that aren't known nationally. That are known on their particular campus or in their particular region because they are doing this really intense practitioner work. And I thought that that was brilliant because some of the things that they're talking about, some of the things that they're suggesting, some of the examples that they're providing are so clearly practical, accurate, speaks to the voices that have been feeling left out and reminding us of the importance of that work. So that was, I just think that that was a piece of genius in your putting this together. I want to stop teasing people and start talking about some of these frameworks because they are so important and they add so much more. So let me ask this question about the frameworks themselves. There are a variety of them offered. in the book. So what frameworks can or should we use in conceptualizing student development theory, and how, and what are some of the things that you're actually offering? What are you suggesting that people know and use and do differently? Fred, why don't you start us off there?
Sure. So I would say, to me, what is one of the things that's most critical about these frameworks is that, one, they give the alternative perspective and they honor the value, the voice, and the experiences of each one of those, lack of a better term, the older nomenclature, subpopulations. So population, we're not sub anything. So of the populations that are covered. So with each one of those populations, you have authors, you have scholars, you have practitioners, you have individuals who are truly talking about their experiences in whatever capacity they bring to the book. And I'm big, one of the courses that I have taught or sometimes teach is qualitative research. So, and definitely, as Dr. Smith can attest, whether we're teaching qualitative research or not, we're chairing a gajillion dissertations. So we're always steeped in qual or particularly qual research. So, but one of the key terms in qualitative research that I always get students to think about when they're talking about their positionality statement is the emic versus the edict perspective. So the insider perspective, the emic perspective versus the edict perspective, the outsider perspective. So it's kind of, it gets weary being the subject of the narrative as opposed to being the producer of the narrative.
Right.
Why is someone else telling my story about being a Black man or about being a Black college student who is, and again, I'm not trying to say that people outside the edict perspective doesn't matter. It does matter. But you can't have the edict perspective all the time.
Right.
Every once in a while, can I speak for myself? Can these Black men who look like me have their own narrative? Can we foreground our own masculinity, our own gender identity? So these are the things that I think, that Black woman should talk about her epistemology and what that means by way of a theory. That Native American man should talk about, what does it mean to be in a higher ed environment where everything is about this very, very low context culture when I come from a high context culture. So how do we get the narratives? How do we have the opportunities for people to truly talk from an authentic space? And I think that is what this book does. It allows the foregrounding of emic perspectives told by the individuals who are actually going through these experiences, as opposed to the edict perspective, somebody outside pontificating and trying to imagine who I am. You don't have to imagine who I am when I'm sitting right before you, when I can tell you. But that is what people of color, people of different identities have not been able to do. The higher ed literature has validated and valued this particular line of inquiry and this particular line of telling the story that is not always indicative, not always representative of who I am. And that's what we wanted this book to be. Each one of these chapters, it is a representation, an authentic representation of who these people are. And Dr. Pope, I'm so glad you said what you said. The brilliance of this book is that it's not just research one scholars or scholars coming from our big AAU institutions, because we know, and I take that, part of that comes from my experiences being a professor and writing letters of recommendation, serving as an external reference evaluator for so many colleagues and scholars. And I can remember when I was in the big research one, when I was at Texas A&M, when I was at Rutgers, and when scholars would come up, one of the things that we were saying in the narrative, as you know, at most institutions for tenure and promotion, when you're selecting those people to serve as your external evaluators, They tell you to get individuals from peer institutions, institutions of a similar Carnegie classification ilk. So we get that. However, there's always this caveat. Not all intelligentsia, not all scholars, not all top scholars are in research ones.
That's right.
So you will find these amazingly brilliant scholars who might be at a Berea College, who might be at an institution, might be at a Stephen F. Austin State University. No lesser institution, great institutions, but not the cachet and caveat of being a research one. Well, I apply that very same notion, that very same thought behind the scholarship that we are doing in this very present context. As the world shifts and starts to recognize HBCUs, I mean, we got this HBCU frenzy going on right now. The worry that I have about that is that for the traditional audience is that there was this poet years and years ago that I heard, this was back when slam poetry was just kind of coming on the scene. I will never forget. It was this Afrikaner scholar. She was really, really sharp, and she had this poem, and I just remember the hook. She just kept reiterating this hook. And the hook said, you take the culture, you leave the people. 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 So that has stuck with me. That was like 1997. That has stuck with me all that time. You take the culture, you leave the people.
Right.
So with this big ethos, this mood, this zeitgeist we have in this country right now about HBCUs, I want us to not only take the culture, but also take the people along with you as you move. And I think this book does that.
Well, I think it does in a couple of circumstances, because you could look in, this book is so broad, you know, with your, what is it, 19 chapters or 18 chapters. And then there's 7 parts to this book. And so there are parts where you're talking about African-American populations. You're talking about Asian American student populations and providing frames and frameworks for those. You're talking about Latinx college populations, and again, providing multiple frames there. LGBTQIA populations and providing multiple frames there. Multiracial and Native American college student populations, non-traditional age college student populations. And so it really has a whole lot going in there. And with each of those, you take the culture and not the population. And you're saying, take them both, you know, and that's such an important part of that. So let me ask you a couple of questions about these frameworks that were offered and what, again, these scholars, these practitioners offered that is both similar and different. If you were to think about how these frameworks translate to practice. Now, you know, for those of us who are scholars, who are professors, we know the importance of that. Sometimes we don't, we're not living that anymore, even though we lived it before, right? So what I'd like to know is, you know, as you think about those different chapters and the folks who offered these frames, how can these frameworks translate to practice in the various domains? And so I'm saying to my listeners right now, listen up, because those of you who are doing this in practice work, this book is offering you opportunities to really see it. Are there a couple that stand out for you, Stella, as you think about 1 or 2 of these chapters that said, here are some real clear ideas as to how to translate these theories?
You know, that's an interesting question. You know, it's almost like asking you, which one of your kids do you love the most? So whatever I name doesn't mean that I don't love the other one. It's just the one that popped into my head when you asked that question. So when I think about all of the chapters, and this is particularly placed in what I do right now. So as a faculty member in a doctoral program, and thinking about a population that is often not talked about, I really think about the non-traditional age student chapter, and as something that really stands out to me, only because there are so many of underrepresented students in graduate programs that I think are being underserved and not well served in those spaces. The institution does not change the way it does what it does for a graduate student in most cases. And so those chapters talking about different ways to support the educational experience of a non-traditional student, particularly one that's in a graduate program, a working student, I think are really, really important and critical now that we're coming out of COVID. I mean, I think there's things about the student experience that have been revealed that were there before. I think those of us that kind of worked through it as we were trying to make it through undergrad and knew we weren't traditional, but didn't get the kind of support that we needed at that time. You know, now institutions are making changes and shifts in order to support all these different diverse types of students, and being a non-traditional student adds a level of identity that sometimes we don't recognize and we don't talk about. And I believe that is a really important section of the book, and one that is often not talked about as much. And I think it gets to the multiple identities that we bring in. You know, we talked about multiple identities, but as I was thinking about that question, everybody has multiple identities. Like, it's, you know, everybody is walking through life in multiple identities. It just so happens that we are now trying to help people recognize the fact that we come in with multiple identities. And I think about being at an HBCU, you know, people think HBCUs are monoliths, but there's all sorts of dark people walking around with multiple identities on this campus. Like, we are not all the same. And that is the same for all of the groups that we're talking about. So by asking people to recognize people for people, to recognize them for what they bring to the table, and provide them and let them know that you are thinking of them, what they bring to the table, as assets versus deficits, and that you're willing to work with them to get the things that they need to be successful in that space. That's what every one of these theories is trying to say.
Wow. You know, and I think you hit it on the head, and you're right. I'm telling folks, if you haven't read this book, if you don't have this book on your shelf right now, go get it. You know, and I'm looking at my timer here, and we are really getting close to out of time. And there's tons of stuff that I wanted to ask you, tons of stuff I'm sure that you could have said, we didn't talk about this. So let me just give you a couple of minutes each to say, look, I wish we would have covered this, but we didn't get to it, and say a little bit about that. And so Fred, why don't we start with you? What do you wish we had a chance to cover, didn't quite get to, and what can you offer to us?
Was that me? Did you say me?
Fred.
Okay. Okay.
Dr. Bonner.
You're like, okay, hello. Yes, ma'am. And I would say, my dear friend, you've actually covered a lot of the landscape. These have been some excellent questions, and I'm not surprised because you're brilliant. I mean, you do what you do.
I'm going to have you on again next week.
But I would say it kind of piggybacks on what Dr. Smith just said. The thing that I most, one of the things that I like about this book is that it really, really unpacks some areas. It actually allows the reader to go down some pathways that are not traditionally thought of. For instance, and this connects to my book series. I have a book series, Diverse Faculty in the Academy. And the interesting thing about that series, the very, very first book in my series was Racial Battle Fatigue. So when we hear racial battle fatigue, and so this kind of goes to me talking about problematizing, deconstructing. So even when we get to the alternative theories, there's like, our thought process sometimes don't go to an alternative place. So what I like about the very first book in my series is that it's an alternative to the alternative. What I mean by that. So whenever we typically hear a lot of us scholars in higher education, racial battle fatigue, the very first place that we go is for African-American scholars or Black people, which I get it because my dear friend, our good brother, Dr. William Smith coined the term. So very strong Black scholars. So, and Black folks, African-American folks have used racial battle fatigue in some very important and critical ways. What I love about this first book is that it's racial battle fatigue in faculty, but it's not Black faculty, it's Asian American faculty.
Mhm.
That is what I like about this book, in the sense that we get to problematize theory for some populations that our assumption is that they don't need a theory, they're doing fine.
Right.
Moving beyond that whole notion of the stereotype, model minority syndrome. But we see this book also allows Asian American populations to theorize and fit the frame to their culture.
Yep.
Some of the things that we don't know. And I'm also proud about the fact that we have different approaches to Native American LGBTQIA. And as Dr. Smith said, actually piggyback on what she said about non-traditional students, just this past week in our doctoral class here at Prairie View A&M University, our students were saying we had this really wonderful discussion. It was actually Dr. Smith's policy class. This really wonderful discussion about what these students were bringing to the doctoral program. And what we found out is that we need to talk about what it means to be a non-traditional doctoral student.
Yeah.
So they said, we're spending so much time talking about what it means to be a freshman, a sophomore, just getting into college. Do you know, some of us here, they talk about their family backgrounds. They were talking about, having, not having resources, how difficult it was just to get to Prairie View or get into a doctoral program. So like, we get it, Dr. Bonner, yeah, we need to talk about at that level, what it means, some of these non-traditional issues, but has anyone ever unpacked what it means to be a non-traditional doctoral student? Because we catch hell sometimes just trying to make it here in these spaces, whether it's A&M, whether it's Prairie View, whether it's Howard, whether it's Fisk. We are struggling too, but no one really problematizes what it means to be a non-traditional doctoral student.
Right. Well, and our literature is so limited when it comes to graduate education in general. And I've got, one of my doctoral students right now is saying, nobody knows my experience in graduate school. We have very little going on. And so then you take that population and you open it up, as you folks have done in the book, open it up and see who else is in there. Stella, I want to give you a chance to say, what do you wish we had covered that we didn't get to, that are around alternative approaches to student development, or the book that you folks have offered us?
Well, I think, as Dr. Bonner said, we had a really robust discussion. I think it's just enough of a teaser in order for people to go get the book and get it, because it's going to be affirming for you. It's going to be affirming for you personally as you read it, I think, as you see yourself in some of these theories, or we hope you see yourself in some of these theories, and how it will be helpful and instructive as you work with students. So I know we see it at Prairie View as faculty members. We spend a lot of time working with students. In doctoral programs, we spend a lot of time working with students, advisors in undergraduate programs, and faculty in undergraduate programs. I want you, it will be helpful for you so that you can see at least a glimpse of what frame your student might come in. Now, that frame is going to change because each person is individual, but at least it will help you recognize and help that student open themselves up and be able to get the education that they deserve in that space. That is really what this work is about. It's about, how do we create a space that supports these underrepresented students in a way that gives them the experience that they need to go on and do amazing things. And that is our role. And we hope that this text will help those people on the front lines, those practitioners, those faculty members, those advisors, have the tools to do that work.
Well, that's great. I want to grab the book because I want to show it to folks as I talk about this. This is the book that we're talking about, Square Pegs and Round Holes, Alternative Approaches to Diverse College Student Development Theory. For those of you who are watching this on YouTube, you got to see the pictures. And for those of you who are listening, you remember that title. I want to thank you both. I want to thank our sponsors, Stylus Publications and Vector Solutions. And I want to remind you that Square Pegs is published by Stylus. Stylus is proud to be a sponsor for the Student Affairs Now podcast. Browse their student affairs, diversity, and professional development titles at styluspub.com and use the promo code SANOW for 30% off all books plus free shipping. You can also find Stylus on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter at @StylusPub. Vector Solutions. How will your institutions rise to reach today's socially conscious generation? These students report commitments to safety, well-being, and inclusion are as important to them as academic rigor when they're selecting a college. It's time to reimagine the work of student affairs as an investment and not as an expense. For over 20 years, Vector Solutions, which now includes the Campus Prevention Network, which was formerly EverFi, has been the partner of choice for more than 2,000 colleges and universities and national organizations. So with 9 efficacy studies behind their courses, you can trust and have full confidence that you are using the standard of care for student safety, well-being, and inclusion. Transform the future of your institutions and the communities you serve. Learn more at vectorsolutions.com, Student Affairs Now. Huge and heartfelt shout out to Natalie Ambrosi, the production assistant for the podcast, who does all the behind the scenes works and works so hard to make us look and sound good. To our listeners, I am so grateful for all your time today. This conversation has given me so much to think about, and I hope it's done the same for you. As you listen today, if you found this content to be useful for your student affairs practice and scholarship, we'd love it if you shared this episode with your social media networks. Please subscribe to the podcast, invite others to subscribe, share on social media, or leave a 5-star review. It really helps the conversations like this to reach more folks and build a bigger learning community. Again, I'm Rochelle Pope, and thanks to these amazing folks, Drs. Fred Bonner and Dr. Stella Smith, and to everyone else who's listening and watching. Be safe out there, folks.